Just to get started, I do want to remind everybody we are recording this. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome Governor Tina Kotek to our roundtable discussion with EO Media Group editors and reporters. This is the first of what we hope will be regular check-ins with you as the governor. My name is Jerry O'Brien. I'm the editor for the Bulletin, and in this room with me today are members of the Future Journalists of America, high school students from Central Oregon. FJA is funded by the nonprofit Foundation for Oregon Rural Journalism, or FORGE, and executive director for FORGE is Jody Lawrence Turner, who is also to my left over here. She also mentors these students on the Fourth Estate. Plus, we have editors from just about all 13 newspapers across the state with EO Media Group. The way we'll do this is we will first hear a few remarks from Governor Kotek, and then in alphabetical order of the papers, each of the news outlets will ask a question or two of you. That's okay. We hope to wrap up in an hour's time, and this is being recorded. Please mute your speakers when you're not speaking. Governor Kotek, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Jerry. And it's nice to have future journalists joining us today. And it's a really important career. So please stay the course. And I just want to thank everyone for your flexibility for the reschedule. I know we had this scheduled a couple weeks ago and something came up. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to do this again. And I do hope that this will be something we do again. So I appreciate that on a regular basis. So I want to start off with a couple comments and then I look forward to your questions. As you know, in fact, I think I had the opportunity to meet with some of you in your home communities during the One Oregon Listening Tour. It was really important for me in my first year to keep that commitment to visit every county in our beautiful state, and not just to pop in or pop out, but to spend significant substantive time to develop those working relationships that I think are important as a governor to be able to govern for the entire state, to engage and listen to challenges, solutions, what people in their local communities would like us to do as a partner. And because at the end of the day, we are one state. There are always local differences and regional differences, whether you're urban, suburban, rural, frontier. And what I found on my visits is that a lot of the same issues, right? We care about people having a roof over their heads. We care about good schools. We might have some disagreements about some of the solutions to our challenges. But what I found and heard was a lot of innovation, a lot of energy, people just stepping up and serving their communities to fix things. And it was a very inspiring year for me. And the First Lady was on, I think, almost 3/4 of those visits as well. So both of us really appreciated the generosity of everyone who spent time with us on the tour. We're obviously in a legislative session, just following up on the focus of my first year coming into legislative session, being very focused on the top priorities of Oregonians: housing production, serving people who are unsheltered, living outside. The one bill I had for session was and is a housing production bill, Senate Bill 1527. We are very close to seeing that come to conclusion. It is a comprehensive proposal to bring a set of tools that we need in the state to really improve our housing production across the state and all communities. I heard it on my visits. Everybody has a housing problem. Might look a little different, but people move into the community, have nowhere to live. People with good jobs have nowhere to live. People who aren't sheltered have nowhere to move into if they've become stabilized. So we just have a lot of work to do there. So the legislature is moving forward on housing production. There's at least 3 bills that they're packaging together. There's also money in there to continue our commitment for statewide infrastructure as it comes to serving folks who are experiencing homelessness. So very focused on housing and homelessness again. I did re-up my emergency order on homelessness as a statewide emergency. In our first year under the homelessness state of emergency, we had very specific goals. We met the goals as it related to preventing houselessness, creating new shelter capacity, rehousing individuals. We exceeded all those goals. The emergency is still in effect. We are focusing again on prevention, rent assistance, keeping people housed so they don't need to be served because they've lost their housing, and then focusing on rehousing, people who've gone into the expanded shelter systems that we've created to get stable, helping them get rehoused. So we will have new goals around this year's emergency order, and we are continuing to work with local communities to hit those goals. Two other priorities that we've been focused on, education. We're moving forward on early literacy grants. Every district in the state has stepped up to apply for the early literacy grants that were funded in last year's session. So we're continuing to monitor that, work with local districts, review their plans. The priority goal for this legislative session, working with legislators, has been an investment in summer learning. We are just hearing in the last 24 hours that the legislature is moving forward with a $30 million investment to work with high-need schools around the state to have additional resources for summer learning this summer to help with, frankly, some of the academic progress that's been delayed because of the pandemic. We're continuing to work on that. So that is real optimistic news that we've heard from the legislature here in the last day. We're also focusing on behavioral health. In the first year, we spent a lot of time trying to understand where do we need to go. This year, we'll be focused on taking the information we have around needed capacity in regions around the state, focusing on workforce, focusing on prevention in our schools to keep kids from doing something that could end their life in terms of, taking a pill that could be laced with fentanyl. So there's a lot of work we need to do there in behavioral health. And we're also looking to see what the legislature is doing on the next phase of the Measure 110 conversation. So I'm happy to talk about that. And then I think that's the last thing I would say is, being my second year, we're continuing to be committed to visiting parts of Oregon. This year's commitment specifically is visiting the 9 federally recognized tribes. We will be having also our annual tribal summit. So it'll, as you all know, we have tribes throughout the state. I will be visiting them in their communities, and that will also get me to different parts of the state again this year. So with that, I look forward to your questions. Thanks for the time.
Great, thank you so much, Governor. The first question will be from Jason Jacoby of Baker City. And I'll ask everyone when you speak, just kind of quickly introduce yourself and ask your question. Unmute, of course. And we'll start with Jason.
Thanks, Governor. I am Jason Jacoby, the editor of the Baker City Herald. And my question is about wildfire funding, specifically House Bill 4133, Senator Steiner's bill. If it doesn't pass, would you suggest any other ways that the state could potentially reduce the protection rate that owners of forest and rangeland east of the Cascades pay for wildfire protection through ODF?
Thank you for the question. So 4133 is an important piece of legislation as the kind of next step on how we as a state manage our wildfire response needs. I know some folks would like to continue to manage that bill. I think it is creating some solutions that we need right now, including particularly the issue for property owners east of the Cascades on our rangelands, and the increase in the cost has been substantial. So at this point, I'm working to get the bill passed. I think that it's a targeted way to deal with where we are right now. I think we probably need more conversations, but we should get it done this session. And so I will be urging legislators to do that. And because I do think it's important to keep folks across the state involved in helping to fund the response and making sure it's, we can move forward, because it's just incredibly important we get it done. So if you have particular questions about it, I'm happy to answer, but right now I'm trying to make sure we can get 4133 over the finish line.
Thank you.
Okay, Anna Kaminsky from the Bend Bulletin.
Hi, Governor. This is Anna Kaminsky, the government reporter for the Bulletin. I'm wondering, I have kind of a two-parter related to homelessness. Can you characterize the work that you've done in the recent past with Deschutes County officials on homelessness in Central Oregon? And then can you tell me a little bit about how you intend to address unsheltered homelessness here in the face of some pretty muddled jurisdictional boundaries, along with funding needs and appetites for solutions like outdoor managed camps?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, I'll go back to, beginning of last year when I set a tone for the state saying, we're in an emergency situation as it relates to folks experiencing unsheltered homelessness. And believe me, we also have other individuals who are very housing unstable and insecure, who aren't outside, but we said we need to focus on the folks who are outside. The approach that we took, I think, has been beneficial, not only for other parts of the state, but for places like Deschutes County. Saying to local communities, if in your region, you need to come together with an emergency management structure. We call them multidisciplinary action groups, MAC groups, to come in and say, how do we all work together? We put money on the table and said, here's the money to help you prevent homelessness, get your shelter capacity expanded, and get people rehoused. Deschutes County hit their goals. I am aware that, between, you have your cities like Bend and Redmond with Deschutes County, trying to figure out who should do what. I've been encouraged by the development of the role of the Central Oregon, I think Intergovernmental Council, if I got that right, COIC. And we've been, I've been engaged with county commissioners and city leaders about, in fact, we even worked last year on what I would call a framework of, we're all going to do what we can. We're all going to come to the table. I know there's some issues, jurisdictional issues around certain locations of sites, but here's the bottom line. We all have to be rowing in the same direction. We have to be working together. Even if the conversations are difficult, we have to be working together. And I am available anytime to weigh in, and my team is as well, if things seem like they're going off path. But I've just been super impressed by everyone's ability to come to the table and talk and try to resolve the issues. In fact, when I was in Redmond, we were meeting with members of the regional leaders who are working on these issues, and I was really impressed by their ability to work together. Now the issue becomes, as the biggest issue in Central Oregon, is the challenge of where people go, right? You can get somebody from living outside, get them into a shelter because you have increased shelter capacity, then the rehousing issue is huge there. So that's why I'm 100% focused this year on housing development, so we can get more homes built in a place where it's highly unaffordable and you have very limited supply. So I hope that answers. I'm happy to do a follow-up, but I think it's about local coordination, having those hard conversations, the state weighing in when necessary as kind of like, hey, we have money, we want to help you, we need to move forward. But I've been, even despite the bumps, there's been a lot of success in Central Oregon.
One quick follow-up. Are you open to reconsidering, there was a communication in which you stressed the importance of utilizing all the available land within the city's UGBs before exploring any land outside of that? Are you willing to reconsider that? Or, where are you at on that now?
No, thanks for asking. Not at this point. And here's why. I think we have to exhaust all options within the UGB because close to the services, it's easier to serve those locations. The idea of going outside the UGB, difficult for the people who might be living that far out, but also difficult for getting services to them. It is more practical to maximize what you can do within the UGB before doing that. Now, if communities come back and say, like, we've tried everything, certainly we have to be open for conversations. But right now, we're not at that spot. I think we have to find those sites within the UGB. They're better service. They're closer to amenities as well as just, frankly, electricity. I mean, like basic things you need to have, some of these shelter sites.
Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. Bennett Hall from the Blue Mountain Eagle.
Hello, Governor. Bennett Hall. I'm the editor of the Blue Mountain Eagle. EO Media did some reporting a while back on a significant shortage of sexual assault nurse examiners, the people who do rape exams at hospitals around the state, but especially in rural and frontier areas like ours. What can the state do to try to address that shortage?
Well, that's a great question. There was a bill last year about that, correct? In the legislature, I think that I want to say it was Senator Brock Smith from the South Coast, or at least recognizing that we have a challenge there. I'll be honest, I don't have a direct answer on that, but here's what I would say about anytime we are short on the types of professionals we need to keep people safe, we have to step back and say, how do we do that? I've been really clear that when it comes to Oregon State Police, ability to be in as many places in the state. We got to maintain that coverage, and we all know we're a little short there. But I do know that we are on track by the end of the biennium on the state police side. Because of the enhanced classes at the training academy and resources from the legislature, we might actually for the first time get to a much better staffing level for OSP, which is good for the state. As it comes to sexual assault nurses, I would have to get back to you on that. I know there's been some conversations about that. The degree that we can regionalize this is a tough thing to actually do remotely, right? So in fact, not possible, but how do you make sure we can bring something to a situation where someone is getting served right away, in a traumatic situation where we can also gather the evidence we need. So we'll get back to you on that.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. The Capital Press, Matus Burkowski.
Hi, my name is Matus Burkowski. I'm with Capital Press. We're an agricultural publication covering the West. And I had a question for you regarding cap and trade. Do you see that as being in Oregon's future, and why or why not?
Well, as you know, thank you for the question. Still very committed, as I was a speaker, to make sure we can hit our climate goals in the state and reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. We are back in rulemaking at DEQ under the climate protection program. The court case said that we had made some mistakes in how the rulemaking was done. We're back in rulemaking there. Right now, that is the program I'm supporting, making sure that we can continue to reduce greenhouse gas emissions through that program. I don't have a position about where we're going. I will say that, ironically, we are hearing from people from different sectors who are saying, wouldn't it be great to have a market-driven cap and invest program to help manage our climate goals as well as help certain sectors out? Some of those were the same people who were not supportive in 2019 and 2020. So I don't know what the future is there. Right now, I'm focused on the program that DEQ has. We're back in rulemaking, and we'll just have to see what people would like to do instead. But right now, that's the program that's on the table.
Okay, Matus, any follow-up? Let's hear from the East Oregonian, Berit Thorson.
Hi, Governor. My name is Berit Thorson. I'm a reporter with the East Oregonian. And this first question I've got for you is a little bit more broad, but what do you see as the #1 need in Eastern Oregon that the state can address, and how do you plan to achieve that?
Well, for me, I'm gonna cheat a little. It's probably a twofer. It really does come back to housing for me. And housing production is going to look different in every community. I think some of you have heard this story before. Standing on a hillside in John Day, listening to folks who are building a home, who are going to bring our 3D printer from Ontario to kind of build on. I'm like, there is a lot of innovation going on. So we need to do the regular sticks and bricks, and then we need innovation, and we need all different types of housing options. And we have to make sure we can meet what the local community's needs are. So what I need to do is to make sure that particularly rural and frontier communities really help to visit, right? So I have a sense of like the landscape and the size of the communities, meeting the individual needs of communities, making sure the tools that we're putting on the table will actually meet those specific needs. That could be financing, it could be construction workforce, it could be a whole host of things. So I'm committed to doing that. The other item I would say, just globally, since it was a more global question, as governor, I just want things to work for people, really focus on customer service. So when a community is, struggling with an agency, that our regional solutions team can be there, coordinate conversations. I'm very familiar with a few of them in the community, things that are just like ongoing things that need to be addressed. State government should work well for every Oregonian in every corner of the state. And that takes effort and intentionality on our part. But I see that as, I want every Oregonian to say like, hey, they're listening to me. They're responsive. So I think that's true around the state, but I think for folks who feel a little left out in other part, maybe eastern side of the state or southern parts of the state, customer service, I think, is really important to kind of rebuild confidence in state government being there for you.
Okay, and we want to hear from the Hermiston Herald, which might be Bird or Phil Wright. Who's going to take that?
Sorry, our questions applied for both. So
Or both.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, so Isabella Crowley from LeGrand Observer.
Hi, thank you so much, Governor. My name is Isabella Crowley. I am a reporter with the LeGrand Observer. On a common theme here of housing, I also have a housing-related question. So I know that a lot of the Housing Production Advisory Council recommendation didn't make it into the final legislature that is currently going on. What are some of the plans that you have to move forward with those other recommendations? And in particular, do you see any having particular ramifications for Eastern Oregon?
Thank you for the question. There were 59 recommendations out of the Housing Production Advisory Council, who, by the way, subject matter experts from around the state, good geographical distribution, everywhere from builders to engineers to people who, work in a housing authority. So I'm really pleased with what they came up with. The timing of the bill for session was such that we knew some of the things were going to be real core recommendations. We started there. So the Housing Accountability and Production Office, the state's commitment to say, we will now have a place at the state where you can come with your problems or come with the needs of assistance. And we're going to have technical assistance grants and we're going to have model codes for you. So local communities who are on the ground doing the work are going to be supported. That was a really important thing for a lot of folks. Infrastructure investment, some of the things around workforce housing incentives. So glad to see those in the bill. As it relates to the next round of work, to be very honest, wanted to get through the session, see where we are, look at the rest of the recommendations and keep going. This is not a, hey, we did it this year, we're not coming back. So warning to the legislature, we're going to keep talking about housing because there are different tools, things that are going to take a little longer. I got to say, one of the things we have to all focus on is the workforce. I think that's a particular problem for smaller communities around the state. Construction companies who will come into these your communities in smaller places and do these smaller projects. So that is something I think that is of particular importance for Eastern Oregon, because we hear that it's like nobody wants to build here. It's like, no, we have to figure out how to get that done, and that will take some incentive and work with the private sector to get that to happen. So that is something that we're definitely going to be focusing on.
Great, thank you. Tim Trenner from the Redmond Spokesman.
Hello, yeah, Tim with the spokesman here in Central Oregon. Quick question here about, it looks like the Department of Water Resources is set to deny a groundwater permit for the city of Redmond. I believe that's the first such denial of a municipality in Central Oregon. What's your directive to that department about balancing the state's groundwater, depleting groundwater here in the region versus city's mandates to provide water to its citizens?
Yeah, so thanks for the question. We are in the process of recruiting a new director, by the way, at the Oregon Water Resources Department, which is a critical leadership position for me to fill going forward. We all need to, I think, take a more focused approach to our water issues. And I think we are seeing that with some of the conversations coming out of on groundwater permitting from the department, anticipating that this is something we're going to have to deal with. Redmond just is at the front of the list there of having these questions raised around future permitting for future growth. For me, I'm going to tie it back to, in the near term, on housing to make sure that there is a connection there. But right now, I'm sure every community is really worried about their future growth because of this renewed focus on groundwater capacity and how we do permitting. So I don't have a good answer other than this is a critical conversation. If we're going to make sure that current property or current water rights holders have what they need and future development can be met at a very basic level, these discussions are going to be critical. So we should probably follow up maybe in a couple months about water, because it's a conversation that I'll be having with my team here in the next couple of months about what are we going to do in 2025 around water. It doesn't solve the Redmond question. I understand there's frustration in Redmond. And again, they just happen to be first in the queue on this, but this is a conversation we're all going to have to grapple with. We're seeing depletions in water resources. We have many, many needs. And I think if we manage better, we'll be able to accommodate these needs. But right now, we don't have the systems in place to ensure that. And I think that's what we're seeing with the changes on groundwater.
Great, thank you. Troy from the Rogue Valley Times.
Hello, Governor. It's Troy High, the editor of the Rogue Valley Times. We're the newest EO newspaper. We started about a year ago, and we're proud to be here. Thank you for joining us. We published a 5-part series early in our tenure on a local caregiver's death that was at an East Medford group home. It was for the developmentally disabled. The series was spurred by someone who had contacted us after reading a story that was in the Oregon Capital Chronicle. There's been no action taken against the individual who allegedly killed the woman at the group home, Barbara Bobby Collada. And so far in our follow-up stories, family members and Rep. Pam Marsh of Ashland have said that there seems to be little movement to address the issue of caregiver safety in the state. Do you think this issue has been addressed adequately in light of the reporting on caregiver injuries and deaths? And also, do you think what do you think should be done to improve safety conditions for Oregon caregivers who are employed to work in group homes for developmentally disabled individuals?
Well, thank you for doing the work on that. It was a very troubling story, and I'm glad that Rogue Valley is there to take the spot of where we were with the Mail Tribune. So thank you. No, we're not doing a good enough job, and I think we can expand that as it relates to caregivers in residential homes to what we're seeing in residential facilities for individuals, who are dealing with a mental health issue. Right. I went to the funeral of a worker who was killed at a residential facility in Portland. And we are very focused on the workforce issues around safety. We cannot recruit, retain, and support caregivers and other types of direct service workers in these residential settings unless we deal with safety issues. So I don't have any specific answers to DD homes, but you're asking the right questions. And I think it is one of the reasons we have such a workforce shortage in these really key roles, in addition to paying people more and making sure that they have salaries that actually work for them. And we're working on that as well. Let's follow up specifically on some of those issues. I'm a little fuzzy on the details of that one, so I don't want to go much further, but caregiver safety, worker safety for some of our most vulnerable people is a priority for us. And we're going to have to come up with different ways to handle that. But some of that is pay, some of that safety standards of the folks who have been licensed to do this work. And we have to hold them accountable to make sure they can keep their workers safe.
All right, thank you. Mike McAnally from the Wallowa Chieftain.
Wallowa.
Wallowa. I'm Mike McAnally, editor of the Wallowa County Chieftain. The county just had its second Greater Idaho meeting just this morning, which inspires a sort of updated version of a question I asked when you were at Wallowa Resources last year. And then I wanted to ask a related question that kind of follows up on a question Isabella asked. But the first question is, at least to me, it's obvious that the Greater Idaho movement isn't really about taking a chunk of Oregon and moving it to Idaho. It's about people in Eastern Oregon feeling that their voices don't matter in Salem, that their voices aren't heard. What are the signals that you can send as governor that would help to persuade Eastern Oregonians that their voices do matter? Yeah. And then the second question is, again, sort of related. We have a 400 million or whatever the final amount housing package coming out from the legislature, it looks like. How do you ensure, again, as governor, that Eastern Oregon gets its fair share of those resources for housing or for addiction services? Because that too is sort of an undercurrent in our Greater Idaho discussions here.
Yep, absolutely. Let me start with the latter and go back to the front end of the question. So one on behavioral health capacity. I commissioned a study last year that the first phase of it has just been released end of January around behavioral health treatment capacity, everywhere from acute hospital beds to residential homes. And the approach we're taking there is by region, by trauma region. And when we see some regions of the states which have zeros in these categories that they studied, that's unacceptable, right? So bringing a regional approach. Not every community can have every service in a mile down the road, but you should be able to, within your region, go to the different types of care that you need. Excuse me. So that's the plan on that approach. Same with housing. I know of our existing housing development dollars, there has been, at least to my knowledge, some emphasis on making sure there's geographical distribution. One of the things that we're working on right now is to put all of our funding streams back together at the state agency. So when you are applying for housing, you don't have to do it 5 different times. You can get into the funding stream for the state, but making sure we have geographic goals, equity goals around the state, so everybody can meet their housing needs. I can tell you right now, we don't have resources to do everything, but I want to make sure that if there's a project ready, that Eastern Oregon is seeing their projects get built, not just out of Portland, right? And folks in the Valley, different types of resources, different types of things that they can get built. So we are focusing on that geographical diversity, not only in behavioral health, but also in the housing side. I agree with your assessment of the Greater Idaho movement. When we talked, people don't feel heard. That is a mechanism to say, yeah, I need to have a conversation about this because I don't feel like I'm taken seriously as an Oregonian in my community. That hurts me as a governor. I don't want to hear that. That's why I visited every county last year. That is why the comments earlier about customer service. I think the way people feel supported is to see things actually happening. I'm not one of those performative governors. It's just like, we're fine, everything's good. It's not working. And when it's not working in your community, it's not working for the state. So again, this will, I think, take time for people to have renewed confidence in the west side of the state, seeing the other side of the state as part of the state. But that's where I am. I'm committed to that. And but we have to show it every day in everything we do. And that's, how we're going to approach it. And I forgot, since you mentioned LeGrand, I forgot to give my special shout out for what you're doing on LeGrand. I was out with the hospital execs the other day about what Grand Mountain Hospital is doing, working with the school district, getting young people in the high school to take up construction careers, to build homes on land that they bought, that then they will buy for the folks who are coming. I like that whole circular effort of saying, we're going to solve this by getting every part of the system together. I think it's something other parts of the state are going to probably have to think about.
Great, thank you. This is from our FJA students. What are you planning to do to remedy the fact that Oregon public schools continuously rank at the bottom of the 50 states on overall performance?
Yep. Well, that has to be better. So what am I doing specifically? So I really appreciate the question. This is one of the reasons I focused so much last year and continuing to focus on literacy, making sure that every school district is doing the instruction that actually will have the best outcomes. We are right now working with the programs that train teachers for the future to make sure that what they have in their curriculum is actually teaching the science of reading in a way. So when they go into schools, they will also be, making sure students are getting the best way to learn how to read, because our reading numbers are abysmal. So I think you need both targeted things like that, early literacy, career and technical education, summer, those types of supportive elements that will help for students who are struggling to be more successful. But it's bigger than that. So we had the strike in Portland, practically the whole month of last November. And the crisis there, I think, was indicative of other strains on school districts around the state around resources. So I am committed working on the formula of how schools are funded, making sure we can modernize it, address the core functional needs of our districts. And that includes compensation for educators who, I think, is it Baker that's doing real well recruiting, because I think they're paying people more. So looking at the formula of how we're funding, looking at some of the needs in our districts right now around the social and emotional health of our students. One of the things we've heard around the state is it's very difficult right now because there's still a lot of behaviors that got worse during the pandemic that are still showing up in classrooms. So how do we support our educators to create calmer environments so everyone can be successful? So in the short term, creating safer classrooms for everyone, if I can be so blunt about it. And then the other issue is being transparent. the resources that are coming into schools, people need to know how much it is, what it's being spent on. We have a proposal that the legislature has right now on a transparency office in the Department of Education that will put all these things online. Other states do this. You can go and be like, what's in this school district? What do they spend it on? Doesn't take a lot, but by having that information, I think it educates all of us of what the resources are. I'm not one of those people who believes it's just about the money. We always need to make sure the resources are adequate. But how is the money being spent? How is it resulting in the outcomes we need? That's where I'm going to be focusing as we go into 2025 to talk about school funding in a way that's actually meeting the needs of our districts. I'm just going to say one more thing about our schools. I think we're all seeing the news about attendance. It's not good, right? We're one of those states where people are like, your numbers are not great, Oregon, right? You cannot learn if you're not in school. So some of that is making sure every student feels safe and welcome and supported being in those school districts. You know, when I hear from young people who feel like I'm not going to school because I don't feel safe or I don't feel seen, that is something that does not take money. That is changing a culture within a school. So our students will come in, they'll feel supported, they see something that gets them excited, and then they will graduate and be successful. So we got to do it all. We have a new director at the Department of Education, Dr. Williams, Dr. Charlene Williams, who's been there. She got officially approved a couple months ago. She's fantastic, very focused on all the issues I just talked about. I want better for our students, and I'm going to work really hard to make that happen. And I really appreciate the question.
Okay, great. Well, we're going to go around the horn again one more time. First, we will hear from Jason Jacoby of Baker City.
Governor, you mentioned the LeGrand Hospital, and as you well know, the situation in Baker City is not so bright regarding the hospital. Have you or anyone in your office had any recent conversations with St. Alphonsus Hospital here in Baker City about the potential to reopen the birthing center that closed here in August of last year?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And again, kudos to Graham Ron in LeGrand for figuring out how to be a partner there, because we have individuals who were needing services and they lost it in Baker City. I haven't personally spoken with the hospital in quite a while, not since middle of last year. You know, Senator Wyden and I have been incredibly frustrated by the response of the, for lack of a better term, hospital conglomerate that runs your hospital there. This is also a national issue of seeing maternity services, for example, as not being seen as required and going away in rural communities. So I know my team has been having conversations with the city, with the county, with the conversation of, you know, how do we figure out how to do this, whether it's through a special district or working with other regional providers to make sure that Baker City and Baker County can have maternity care. I'm going to stay with it. I feel like talking to the hospital is probably not going to result in much because they've made a decision, but that doesn't mean the community can't chart its own path here. So we're there to be helpful.
Okay, thanks. Anna Kaminsky from the Bulletin.
Hi, Governor. What is your take on ranked choice voting, and especially as it's presented in House Bill 2004? It would affect your seat if you were to run for re-election, I guess later on down the line. So if you want to also tell us if you're running for re-election, that would be awesome.
Well, if anybody knew me when I was in the legislature, I'm like, I would decide that every 2 years. I mean, I wasn't one of the, I was never been a lifer. So in my second year, so I don't have an answer for that. But I'm just focused on doing the job day to day. You know, I'm kind of agnostic about ranked choice voting. I think some folks think it's, you know, a tool to engage people in democracy differently. I think it can be complicated and confusing for voters. I will be interested to see how it's rolled out and making sure it's set up in a way where it can be successful. So I'm probably more focused on making sure the Secretary of State's office can get the details right when it is implemented. So as you know, in the city of Portland, with the change of the city government there, they are also employing ranked choice voting.
Right.
So I mean, I think it's an experiment. Let's see how it goes. I'm just, like I said, a little agnostic about it. I see the pros and cons, so.
Thank you.
Okay, Bennett Hall, Blue Mountain Eagle.
Yeah. You know, here in Grant County, we have a small population to start with, and it's been shrinking over the last couple of censuses. That has a significant impact on local tax bases. We see that play out in difficulty in funding law enforcement services and firefighting services. All of our firefighters out here, all of our fire departments are volunteer operations. They have very little in the way of financial support. What steps can the state take to try and shore up these kind of basic services in small rural counties like ours that are struggling to pay for them?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I do know that the Oregon State Fire Marshal, and we've been doing more even in the last 2 years around state resources into fire response, fire prevention. I know she's very focused on making sure we have a certain level of response in every community, right? Certainly, when there is for example, a conflagration, we mobilize and folks come in, but there has to be folks on the ground who are there at the beginning of an event to make sure it doesn't get, to contain as much as they can until more folks can come in to help. So the training capacity, some of the apprenticeship programs that we're trying to run, making sure you have some of the equipment, making sure that I want to figure out how we get more long-term funding streams there. So, to have the equipment, to have the place, so every community can be resilient. I don't have all the answers there, but we have a new director of emergency management. The state fire marshal is now an independent agency. I feel like the response from the state is getting more aligned, but there's a clear understanding that communities, small and large, need to have local capacity to be there on the ground from day one. To the other question about, growth in a community, we haven't talked about this at all, but for me, making sure that all parts of the state can enjoy the economics of being able to work remotely, we have broadband dollars going out, we have new maps, making sure communities around the state have access to broadband infrastructure. And we have lots of money flowing. And over the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to see filling in all those holes around the state who don't have broadband. Because people can be living in communities differently and working in different places. The state of Oregon right now, many agencies, there's a little bit of a roadshow coming to more rural parts of the state where agencies like the Employment Department and Department of Revenue and the more natural ones like natural resources, like forestry and other agencies are doing these job fairs to say, like, come work for the state. And you can do some of this customer service work remotely if you have access to broadband. So one of the ways we can increase your property tax base is people want to live in communities like those in Grants Pass because they like the lifestyle of being where they are, but they also need to have employment. And I think if we can get communities connected through broadband, then people will have more choices, people will stay in those communities, and that will help stabilize the property tax base.
Thank you.
Matthews from Capital Press, please.
Yeah, so my question has to do with the housing bill that you're supporting this session. With the UGB expansion, it keeps getting said that it's a one-time deal. Are you willing to commit that you're not going to support any other type of this type of bypass expansion for UGBs during your tenure? And then secondly, do you see housing production as being a higher priority now than farmland preservation?
Oh, well, let me answer that first, the last and first. I don't think this is a competition. This is not an either or conversation. I think we can have our land use system, protect our vibrant farms, our forest land, those things that we all hold dear, and still have additional housing that frankly is important for every community. The way we drafted the land supply component in the bill, so it does have an expedited tool for communities around expedited expansion of your UGB for housing. If you can show the need for land and the need for affordable homes. So there's a two-part test. If you do meet that, and there's also like, what was the last time you expanded your boundary? You know, there's a set of things. You can't go on to farmland. You can't go on to things. It's only places where you could expand. And then you have to show 30% of those new homes will be affordable for middle income and below Oregonian. So it's a narrow tool. In fact, we've gotten pushback that it's too narrow. Not every community take advantage of it. Not everyone can use it, but it is a tool for some communities who are going to need to grow into areas that they would have been allowed in a fashion that they can do in the next decade while still ensuring affordability and I think alignment with our values. Again, I don't think it's an either or. That's why it's tailored in a way that still respects, you know, frankly, the needs of our farms. And I know there's a lot of concern. We're going to watch it. We're going to see how it's going. And again, if it has to be adjusted because it's being misused, I want to hear about it. Or if it's not crafted in a way that's having the effect, we need to talk about that too. We need to get more housing, but we have to do it within our existing land use system in a way that balances all values. So that's the goal. So I appreciate the question because I know there's concerns out there about
But
it.
would you be willing to commit that you wouldn't push for another one of these one-time UGB expansions, that this is going to be the last one?
I think we have to see how it works. I mean, I think this is going to be an evolving conversation about housing production. I don't think a lot of people have been very focused on the land supply piece. For me, it's like, it's land supply, it's financing, it's construction workforce, it's rules and regulations about when you're trying to build and how long it takes to get permitted. So I think you got to address all of those things to have more development and more housing production. At this point, I don't think we need another tool, but I think we're going to continue to evaluate year after year and then engage in a thoughtful process if we need to tweak anything. Right now, I think it's what we need, and I think we're going to see success with it. And so I don't know if we have to have any changes.
All right, Barrett from the East Oregonian and Hermiston Herald.
I forgot to unmute. My second question has to do with the Lower Umatilla Basin groundwater management area and the nitrates issue that's been ongoing. So specifically, the Port of Morrow continues to violate its wastewater plan, and the Department of Environmental Quality has been kind of continually issuing fines for that violation. And the DEQ expects the port to achieve compliance by 2025. But it's been years and years that this violation has been like continually ongoing. And so I'm kind of wondering about what role you see the state playing and whether you think the state has an obligation in helping the port achieve compliance, and why or why not.
Well, I believe the state definitely has a role in helping the port achieve compliance. We know this is an issue that's 2 to 3 decades old. So it takes some time to turn the ship. We have been very clear with the Port of Morrow. Fines are just kind of the tip of the iceberg there, that practices have to change. We're very much in line with what the EPA is saying, that we need to figure out ways for their wastewater to be processed differently and not contribute to the nitrates in the groundwater. So it will take a little time. We've been heavily involved with them, like identifying financing, identifying property, identifying ways that they can move to a different way to process their water. That is the long-term solution. We've also been focused, as you know, on the near term of identifying, talking to residents, making sure they can get mitigation, you know, water, filters, you know. So we're very much focused on that. One of the things we're doing is, what we've heard is there aren't enough plumbers to do some of the water filtration changes that some of these households need once they're identified and say they want it. So we're like trying to find plumbers who can do this work. So we're working on the nitty gritty of the immediate, but also working with the Port of Morrow that they need to change their practice. There were a lot of practices that contributed to what's happening to the groundwater there in the basin. We're focusing on the Port of Morrow, and there has to be a broader conversation about practices there so we can truly repair the groundwater there, so we're not having this problem, you know, 5 to 10 years from now. That is going to take work, but we have been very clear with the port. They got to change practice. They got to, you know, modernize, and we will help them get the financing and the other things with the federal government to get that happen. And so we are staying on top of it.
All right.
That's
thank
why
you.
we added someone to help out with the advisory committee. You know, we've been able to identify a local leader who can work on, you know, the issues with the advisory committee. We are staying on this. We got to fix this.
Yes. Isabella Crowley from the Grand Observer.
Yes. So I know Mike touched a little bit on addiction and you responded about behavioral health services. I wanted to dig in a little bit deeper there. Here in Eastern Oregon, we have a shortage of beds and detox centers. So people who are in the throes of addiction who want to get help and are ready to get help are not able to, or have a very long wait until they are actually able to get that help. How do we address the need for addiction recovery services in Union County and Eastern Oregon as a whole?
Yes. Thank you for that. And we can get you the link on the study that I was referring to, because it does also talk about substance use disorder treatment. It's both, because many times we you know, co-occurring both mental health and substance use. My understanding is, and the list might be out, but I'm not sure, part of the package related to House Bill 4002, which is the Measure 110 bill, does have a series of projects that have been identified as shovel ready. They're in various different stages, but making sure that more communities have the things that they need. So I think we should all look at that list. I believe it has good geographical distribution. And I think the key there, though, is walking alongside those projects with workforce. Because it's not just about buying a piece of land and putting up a building or renovating a building. You need to actually have the staff who can serve there. So more programs at the community college level to get our CADCs, our peer support people who can actually work in these settings for people is going to be important. There's money in the housing bill for recovery homes and trying to figure out, you know, are they geographically distributed? So when someone has gone through detox and is now looking for a place to maintain their sobriety, do they have a place to go? So I think it's important for all Oregonians to think about this as a continuum. The immediate need, medically assisted treatment, for example, stability, recovery homes, getting folks into, you know, outpatient treatment as well. And that's our goal with the state, to be intentional and be strategic and build continuums in every region of the state. And we have some work to do. We are not where we need to be. And some communities are very underserved. So expect from us in this year very specific goals from a regional perspective. And it's going to take a couple years, but we need to get there.
All right, thank you. Mr. Trainer from the Redmond spokesman.
Yeah, thanks. I was hoping you could talk a bit about funding challenges at ODOT and the difficulty of funding major transportation projects statewide. Places like Central Oregon have major transportation needs. It looks like state dollars are going to be pretty limited here in the next couple of years. So what's planned making sure ODOT has the ability to kind of help finance some major needed projects in years coming ahead?
Oh, Tim, big question. Thanks a lot. I appreciate that. So I'm smiling because it is the topic for the 2025 session, right? Where we are these 8-year cycles where the state does transportation funding packages. And we are kind of running on fumes here at the end of the bill that was passed in 2017. So that's why last year I went to legislative leaders and said, it is not acceptable for ODOT, because of legitimate budget challenges, is deciding to cut back on winter road maintenance and other things. So we got $19 million in general fund in this session to make sure ODOT can do the overtime, can do the, you know, the maintenance during winter events. We need to do striping. I mean, really basic stuff. So we're going to limp into 2025 on the ODOT budget. And then we as a state have to discuss in this coming year how we meet the basic needs of ODOT. And by that, I mean like making sure we can do just the basics and not fancy new things out there. We made some commitments in 2017 for projects, particularly in the metro region, that are not funded and have to get done. And we need basic service out of ODOT. So my guess is it'll be a statewide conversation about what communities need and how we're going to fund it. My guess is we will be looking at a menu of things like we have in the past. So combinations of gas taxes and potentially road user fees if, you know, you're driving in vehicles that, you know, aren't paying the gas tax, right? So fees and other things. My goal to make sure is that we can meet the basic needs of the state, but not overburden Oregonians with how we pay for it. But this is tough. Every state in the union is dealing with this issue, right? We want cars to be more efficient. We want people to be in zero emission vehicles. We have to change how we fund transportation because, like I like to tell people, just because you're an electric car, you still need a road, right? So we're going to have to figure it out. And so you'll be seeing legislators on the road, I'm sure, this year talking about transportation as we build to the 2025 legislature.
Great, thank you. Governor, we have time for, well, we have 3 more questions left. Hopefully we go over just a little bit.
I'll go short. How's like short, little speed date for the last couple?
Okay, yes, speed dating. Here we go. The Rogue Valley Times, Troy High.
Thanks. Can you, Governor, elaborate on offshore wind energy? Recently, you said that offshore was likely going to be a big part of the state meeting its clean energy goals by 2040. A couple of offshore wind plans for the South Coast recently were approved. There's some opposition from the fishing industry and the tribes. Where do you see the debate going on offshore wind in Oregon?
Yes. Briefly, I do believe offshore wind is something Oregonians should embrace, but we have to do it right. I've been frustrated with some of the processes out of the federal government. So there is a bill this session, House Bill 4080, that sets up a process where we're going to work closely with all the constituencies on the South Coast to make sure we can move forward on a wind energy plan that actually meets the needs of the community. So we have to do it, but we have to do it better than what is currently underway with some of the processes done by the federal agency involved. So I do think we need it. And frankly, I don't want California getting all the benefit of having offshore wind. We just need to do it in the best way we can for Oregon. So that's where I'm focused.
Okay. And Mr. McAnally from the Chieftain.
Well, here's a question I never thought I would ask about fish passages. And considering that this is recently the cause of a lawsuit against the state, your answer, you may choose to add a very guarded answer. There's a dam in Wallowa, just off of Wallowa Lake, that's needed retrofit for decades. The plans currently for the dam don't include fish passages or volitional fish passages. They involve trap and haul. And a couple of weeks ago, tribes and environmentalists filed a lawsuit in, I think, the Court of Appeals, saying that ODFW basically overhauled its fish passage rules to encourage trap and haul. Tribes and environmentalists kind of, as you would expect, went to court saying, hey, no, ODFW doesn't have the authority to approve the Wallowa Lake project, that these revisions to Oregon's fish passage rules were basically kind of passed essentially in the dark, in secret. Nobody knew about them. Depending on how a court's ruled, would you encourage ODFW to go back and maybe take a second look at those revisions to the fish passage rules?
I'm going to say I don't feel qualified to get into the details of fish passage, but what I do know about this is there is clearly a disagreement. We need to resolve this. It's always difficult when it gets into lawsuit land because then you are somewhat restricted about how you can resolve it. But I do think we can resolve this. So I believe in continuing the dialogue and, but yes, it's a very challenging situation. So that I'll just leave it at that.
I appreciate the answer because 2 weeks ago I would have been unqualified to ask the question. So.
Good job, Mike. Okay, and our final question from the Future Journalists of America. Local journalism is at risk of disappearing. Where do you stand on state funding of nonpartisan, reality-based journalism?
That's a great question. I was beside myself when I thought the Bend Bulletin was going to close. So thank you for not, figuring that out. To have a different outlet when the Mail Tribune had to close, that's really great. I think it's very difficult for local communities to be civically engaged and educated about their issues without local journalism. I do think there's a role for the state. The question is, how do you establish a firewall so there can be the independence that we need from our media, but also make sure they survive? I mean, you see some of that as we do on at the federal level with, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. There's some commitment there, but we have to figure that out. I haven't seen a proposal come to the legislature that is specific like that and can, create that firewall. And so for independence, But I think we undermine our democracy if we do not have local journalism. So, I feel really strongly about it, but I don't know what the answer is. How's that?
Great. Well, we'll get a bill in front of you this next session.
There you go. There you go. Look forward to talking about it.
Okay, any quick follow-ups by anybody on the call?
And feel free to follow up with our office if you know, a couple of people, I think we'll do follow-ups. We have someone from my team, Anka's on, so we will follow up. But if anything wasn't clear, there's Anka's number, give her a call.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, Governor, thank you so much for your time. I hope we can do this in 3 or 6 months and see what progress we've made on some of these issues.
Yeah, let's try to do it quarterly because I think that'd be helpful. You're all really busy, and so I love virtual meetings. It makes it easier for everybody. So thanks. Take care, everybody. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thanks all. Contact information is in the chat, and I have notes on your follow-up items if you need anything. Regardless, at any time, always feel free to reach out. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.